Good morning, dear students. I hope you all are doing fine. So in today's class, we will start the new chapter, that is the Principles of Management. This is the second chapter, whereas in the previous classes, we studied the first chapter, that is the nature and significance of management. So in this second chapter, we are going to learn the principles of management. What are the principles used for the betterment of management? Okay, let's get started now. So let's go for the introduction now. So before going to the introduction, I will just give you a brief what all you are going to study in the principles of management. In this chapter, you might get totally 7 marks in the examination point of view, whereas you get 2 marks 1 question as well as 4 marks 1 question. So totally this chapter carries 7 marks. Okay, so in this chapter we are going to study the meaning of management of principle and also the significance and nature of management of principle, as well as the importance of principle. Then there are 2 scholars, important thinkers, who have given their rules, their principles for the betterment of management. Now let's go for the introduction. So let me just brief you all the principles of management. So here management is recognized as a separate discipline, whereas it is a systemized body of knowledge. Systemized body of knowledge is nothing but where it is already where they have already given the principles which they have already given. So whereas it is a systemized body of knowledge, whereas it has helped for the betterment of the management. Whereas in this chapter we are going to learn about the 2 main thinkers who have given their ideas of contribution for the principles of management. Whereas the first person is Henry Fayol. He was a French mining engineer. Okay, he was a French mining engineer who has given his contribution to the principles of management. So he is Henry Fayol, who is known as the brigade scholar. Who is the Henry Fayol? He has given the importance of principles of management. That is he was the French mining engineer, whereas he has given 14 principles of management, which we are going to study in the further classes. So he is the first person, and the second person is F.W. Taylor. So he was an American mechanical engineer. Whereas he has also given some contribution for the development of the management, whereas they are given their own principles which has been used for the management for the efficiency and effectively, how management can run efficiently and effectively. So these are the 2 main scholars which we are going to study how in depth and what are the principles they have given. So whereas Henry Fayol is a French mining engineer, where he gave the concept of administrative principle, whereas F.W. Taylor is an American mechanical engineer, whereas he gave the concept of scientific management. In the next coming classes, we will study detailing about Henry Fayol as well as F.W. Taylor. Now study the meaning of principles of management and nature and significance of principles of management, and also the characteristics or features of management, principles of management, and also we are going to study about the two main thinkers who have contributed their principles of management for the betterment of the organization, for the betterment of the management. So now we will go for the introduction, that is nothing but what are the main importance or principles of management. So it is a systemized body of knowledge. Principles of management is nothing but a systemized body of knowledge, whereas it is a separate discipline, whereas where they have given their own guidelines for taking a better decision, which helps for the principles of management, that is nothing but the management. So in this chapter we are going to study about two main thinkers, that is first one Henry Fayol and second one F.W. Taylor. There are many scholars, many thinkers who have contributed for the study of principles of management, whereas we are going to mainly study about two main thinkers, that is Henry Fayol as well as F.W. Taylor. So Henry Fayol is an French mining engineer. He was a French mining engineer who gave the concept of administrative principle, whereas F.W. Taylor is an American mechanical engineer who gave the concept of scientific management. So these two main important thinkers have given their own principles, whereas it helps to achieve the organizational goal efficiently, effectively, and also helps to make decisions, whereas their guidelines has helped the managers to take good decision in the organization. So mainly we are going to focus on these two main thinkers, like what are the principles they have given and how it is used for the management and how it is helpful for the management for the better management. So we are going to study about the two main thinkers. So now we will study the meaning of principles of management. We will learn the meaning and principles of management, whereas it carries 2 marks. It is a 2 marks question, whereas you get a question like, what do you mean by principles of management? Principles of management is nothing but the basic truth and providing general guidelines for decision making and behavior. So you have to concentrate mainly on these things, on the meaning of principle of management, whereas it is a basic truth. So through the principles, how managers are going to use those principles in their management for the achievement of goals. So it is a basic truth which they have done the experiments. Next, it provides general guidelines. Guidelines are nothing but the advices which is given. So they have to follow some general guidelines for the principles of management for decision making. So decision making is a process in the management where the manager makes the decision correctly or how. So it helps for the decision making and behavior. Behavior here is nothing but the human behavior. How the principles are going to help for the behavior, human behavior. So here has the meaning of principle explains us that, which carries to 2 marks, which explains us that it is principles of management are nothing but the basic truth, okay, and provide general guidelines for decision making and behavior. So I hope you all understood the meaning of principles of management. Now we will study the nature or characteristics of principles of management. We will study the nature or characteristics of principles of management. Now we are done with the meaning. Now we will study the nature or characteristics are nothing but the features of principles of management, which carries 4 marks in your examination point of view. So now the first characteristic or feature of principles of management here is, it is universal applicability. Universal applicability is nothing but it is applicable for all kind of organization, whether it is a business organization, non-business organization, small organization or big or private or public sector. It is applicable for all the institution, all the organizations should follow some principles. So these are the first characteristics of principles of management, whereas it is applicable for each and every organization. So next, Next feature is general guidelines. Whereas in the organization there are some general, with the help of the principals, there are some general guidelines which they have to follow. There are some guidelines are nothing but the advices given through the help of the principles which they have to follow. If a manager have to take some decision, so he need to follow some general guidelines which will be helpful for the organization as well as the employees in the organization. So next, the third characteristic is formed from practice and experimentation. So principles are formed from practice and experimentation. So your third point explains us that the principles of management is mainly focused on practice and experimentation, as well as the thinkers they have, where they have given their principles, where the management has to follow, practice those principles which helps for the organization achieve to organizational goals, whereas it is formed from practice and experimentation. Experimentation on the human behavior, how the human behavior differs from one person to another person, whereas the experimentation also will be done, whereas experience or experimentation also will be done in the characteristics of principles of management. So next, the fourth point is it is flexible. Principles of management is flexible, whereas it is not rigid, where it mainly focuses on the human behavior, how the human behavior changes in the organization. So it helps to have some flexible, whereas it can have some change where manager can use some principles, and where it is not a static, where many problems might come. So through that, using those principles, how manager can be flexible to achieve the organizational goals, to get the work done by the employees. So he can take decision according to the time or dynamic change. So next feature here is mainly behavioral nature. Behavioral here focuses on human behavior, how human behavior acts. Likewise, I told you all in the previous chapter itself how human behavior differs from one person to another person, how to tackle those problems, how the manager is going to tackle all those problems. So whereas here mainly the principles of management focuses on the behavioral nature of the human behavior and also the material resources. So it helps here through the principles of management, by using those principles of management, how the organization will be helped to achieve the organizational goals through help of the behavioral nature. So next is cause and effect relationship. Here also it mainly focuses on the human behavior, whereas those are two variables. First is the cause and what are the effect of two variables, whereas it helps how the management has to tackle all those problems, how all the human behavioral problems to get achieved in the organizational goals. So next is it is contingent. Contingent is nothing but the change of subject. For example, as the dynamic changes happens in the organization, that is nothing but the environmental change. So the manager here can use those principles, whereas principles are not rigid, they are flexible. So he can use those principles and also make some changes in the organization as the dynamic changes happens, that is the environmental changes which happens. I repeat again, the first features or characteristics of principles of management. Here as the first one is it is universally applicability, whereas it is applicable for each and every organization, whether it is small or big, business or non-business, as well as private or public. It is applicable, all the universally applicable for all the organization. The second one is it is general guidelines. Principles give some general guidelines to follow, where the manager has to follow some general guidelines for the betterment of the organization with the help of principles. So third one is formed from practice and experimentation, whereas the principles is not where a company cannot run be successful within over a night. It takes some practice, it takes some experiments which has to happen, which on the humans as well as the materials. So it is formed from practices as well as the experimentation. Within a one day the organization cannot achieve the organizational goals, whereas it takes time, whereas the practice makes important as well as the experiments is very much important. So next is flexible. Principles of management are flexible, where it is not rigid. Okay, so according to the change in the dynamic environmental changes, the manager can have some flexibility, whereas he can give some changes according to the principles given by the thinker. So next is it mainly focuses on behavioral nature. Behavioral nature is nothing but the human behavior, how the human behavior changes, how the manager is going to tackle all those human behavior with the help of principles. Next is cause and effect relationship. Those are two different variables, whereas how he is going to tackle with the human behavior in the organization. So next is contingent. Contingent is nothing but the subject of change, where how the dynamic environmental changes occurs. Likewise, the organization also should abide those changes for the betterment of the organization and for the survival with the use of principles given by the thinkers. Now we will study the importance of principles of management. Now we will discuss the significance of principles of management, whereas significance are nothing but the importance of management, whereas it carries 4 marks. Okay, in the examination point of view, you might get this question for 4 marks, where you need to explain all these points. Okay, so here let's get started. So first one is providing manager with useful insight reality. So whereas manager, where he does his work, whereas he might also do some mistakes in the organization, or where he helps the organization, where he helps the manager to get the organizational goals achieved, whereas they have to give some guidelines to them, whereas he has to use some principles, whereas if he does any mistakes, so it helps him to achieve the organizational goals. So it is useful for insight, reality, to know his mistakes and to go for the better experiments. So next one, optimum utilization of resources and effective administration. A short form of administration here. Okay, optimum utilization of resources, whereas optimum is nothing but the less utilization of resources, how efficiently and how effectively we are going to use the resources in the organization, how with the less amount, with the less utilization, without the wastage, how they are going to do the utilization of resources. That is nothing but which helps for the principles of management. With the help of principles of management, how they can optimize the utilization of resources and effective administration. Effective administration is nothing but the good administration with the low cost and with the better output, with the optimum utilization of resources, how it efficiently the administration can run with the help of principles. So it is very much important through the help of principles, with the following of principles, how it is important to optimum utilization of resources. And the third one is scientific decisions. So principles are based on the truth, as I told you all. So there are some scientific decisions which has to be followed, which is generally acceptable, which is with the help of experiments, with the help of practice. So here scientific decisions are made in they are the most important principles of management, where it helps the management to achieve the organizational goals. And the fourth one is meeting changing environment requirements. Environment requirements here are nothing but the change in the dynamic function. That is nothing but the change in the environment. As I told you all before, how changes occurs in the environment, like that the organization should adapt those environmental changes for the survival in the organization and for the betterment in the organization. So here through the help of principles, whereas principles are flexible, not rigid, so with the help of principles it meets the environmental requirement, changing in the environmental requirement, as the manager can adapt those principles and use those principles to have the change in the organization and how the organization changes, I mean the environmental changes. So next is management training, education and research. For better management, we need more training, education and research should be given. For example, like the studies which they are going to do, like studies which are going to do like your MBA, BBA, BCA, like that, which helps which includes the basic concepts of principles, where they study the principles in the studies only while they are doing their education, whereas it is under the curriculum activity, where it helps to learn more about the principles of management. So here these are the 5 important significance or principles of management, which carries for 4 marks. I repeat, the first one, providing manager with useful insight reality. It helps the manager to know his mistakes and learn from it for the betterment of the organization, for the betterment how he can do with the organization. It helps him to go through his mistakes and learn from his experience and for the practice. And the second one is optimum utilization of resources and effective administration. With the less optimum, without doing more of wastages, using more good technologies, how we can optimum the utilization of resources as well as for the effective administration with the help of principles of management. So next is scientific decisions. There are some scientific decisions given by the principles of management, that is under the thinkers of management, how those scientific decisions helps for the achievement of the organization goals. But then the next one is is meeting changing environmental requirements is nothing but the change in the dynamic change in the environment. How the environment, how the technology improves, how the environment changes. Likewise, the organization also should use those principles. With the help of that, they can do the change in the environment for their situation, how it occurs. So next is management training, education and research. As I told you all, like it will include in your studies itself, whereas it is included in the study itself, whereas you study your courses, special courses like MBA, BBA, BCA, whereas you learn many important principles there, where it helps for the management, whereas when they later go to work, it helps those principles to use those principles for the organization. So these are the main significance principles of management. So in today's class, we studied the meaning of management and the nature and characteristics of management, as well as the significance of management. Significance are nothing but the importance of principles of management. So I have given you the 2 assignment question here. So the first one, discuss the significance of principles of management by explaining any 4 points. You will need to explain any 4 points in detail. The second one is explain the characteristics of principles of management. Whereas it is very much important in the examination point of view. Please note the question, write the answer and click up the picture and upload it in the given link below. So in the next class, we will study about the thinkers, 2 main thinkers, what are the principles they have given and how it is useful for the management. Thank you. Have a good day.